When most people think Kentucky, they think basketball, and for good reason. The Wildcats have the most wins in college basketball history. They won their 8th national title in April and have dominated the Southeastern Conference. Kentucky football is another story. Under legendary coach Paul Bear Bryant, UK won a share of the 1950 national championship. But since the Bear left Lexington in 1953, Kentucky has won just one SEC title, and that came back in 1977. The program has won 10 or more games in a season just twice in its history. But while there haven't been a ton of wins, the Kentucky football program made a significant historical contribution to collegiate athletics. By the mid-1960s, most teams had begun to integrate. The Southeastern Conference did not initially jump on the bandwagon. But in the 1970 football game between USC and Alabama, the country saw USC fullback Sam "Bam" Cunningham run roughshod over the all-white Crimson Tide. That game was often cited as the reason that Bear Bryant decided to recruit black players to Alabama. But 4 years earlier, it was the University of Kentucky who took the gigantic step of integrating the SEC, which now without question is the country's best football league. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll tell you about the twists and turns and trials and tribulations that came with this historic event. Welcome to Turning the Page, the story of how the University of Kentucky football program integrated the SEC. Phil Thompson was an All-American high school football player at Louisville's Seneca High School in 1966. Around that time, the Kentucky governor, Edward Breathitt, along with former Governor Albert Happy Chandler and UK President John Oswald, decided that it was time to break the color barrier in the SEC. Seneca High School had been integrated since its inception in 1957 and produced several outstanding black athletes, including Wesley Unseld, who would go on to start at the University of Louisville and enjoy a long NBA career. Noting that Thompson was not only an outstanding athlete, but had played with and developed friendships with many black athletes, Breathitt, Chandler, and Oswald asked him to get involved in the process of breaking the color barrier. In 1966, the University of Kentucky found themselves in the middle of a racial firestorm. That was the year when an all-black Texas Western squad knocked off legendary coach Adolph Rupp and his all-white Rupp's Runts in the NCAA title game. In 1969, Rupp signed his first African-American player, 7'2" center Tom Payne from Louisville. But by that time, UK football was already integrated. It started under Coach Charlie Bradshaw in 1966.
Unbeaten Alabama.
Bradshaw had been an assistant under Bear Bryant at UK and was on Bryant's Alabama staff that won the 1961 national championship. Bradshaw was a taskmaster of a coach known for his brutal practices. His first UK team started out with 88 players but was down to 30 by the end of the year, becoming infamously known as the Thin 30.
It was emotional, physical, and academic abuse that thinned the players. And in Charlie's mind, he was trying to get the toughest players. Well, in fact, the players that stayed would later wonder why they did stay. It was crazy.
Coach Hill, who had played on that team half the season with the broken ribs and a separated shoulder, he told me about all the crazy stuff that went on there, but you know, it's like talking to a World War II veteran. You don't know what's true and what's not, what's puffed up and what's not, and you know, old football players love to exaggerate, and I just couldn't believe some of the stuff that he was talking about that might have been true, but it was.
One of the most spectacular plays of the afternoon takes place in the fourth quarter when Derek Weatherford, Glenn Gray, and Paul Newmoff chase Kentucky quarterback Harry Beadles into his own end zone for a safety.
By the time 1966 rolled around, Bradshaw hadn't experienced much success at UK, as his first 4 teams combined for a record of 17, 20, and 3. With Bradshaw losing games, and with President Oswald in his ear, Bradshaw signed off on UK's grand integration project.
The governor's involved, the president is involved. Everybody is saying it's time to integrate. And he's got good players to pick from. And Bradshaw never evinces that he is a racist.
UK immediately targeted 2 top prospects from the state of Kentucky, Greg Page and Nate Northington, who was referred to as Nat at that time. Page was a strapping 6'2", 215-pounder from the mountains as he played his high school ball at Middlesboro in eastern Kentucky. Northington, a fleet 6', 170-pound running back, was from Louisville's predominantly black community of Newburgh and played at Thomas Jefferson High School.
Nate was outstanding. I mean, when we look at the great athletes that came out of Louisville and Jefferson County back then at Thomas Jefferson High School, Seneca, Mayo, Central, Manual, I mean, they were amongst the best, all-staters. Greg Page was the same way. Greg looked like he was chiseled, 6'2", 225. I mean, just a perfect build for built like Superman.
The fact that Rupp didn't sign his first black player until 1969 has had a negative effect on its national perception when it comes to race. But in actuality, UK was the perfect SEC school to lead the integration push. It had the league's northernmost school. Blacks had been attending UK for more than a decade. It had a progressive president in John Oswald, who spent most of his life in Minnesota and California. Thompson recalls the annual All-State Banquet in Frankfurt when the wheels were put in motion to get Page and Northington to UK.
That was the first night that I really got the hint that there was a bigger deal going on here with recruiting Greg and Nat than I had understood, because the Governor Ned Breathitt, took me aside back to his kind of library area and just told me the significance of what UK was trying to do.
Page and Northington eventually signed with Kentucky. Freshmen weren't allowed to compete on the varsity back then, so Page and Northington spent their first year playing on the freshman team, getting used to their new surroundings. Page and Northington certainly stood out among their fellow students on campus, but what stood out to their new teammates was how the two players had completely different personalities.
He was from Millersboro, Kentucky, which is up in eastern Kentucky, mountain, African-American, who had been used to being in that setting, were predominantly white setting. So yeah, if there was a perfect person for that situation, it was Greg.
There was a kindness about him too. He was funny. I mean, he had a sense of humor. He wore flamboyant clothes. He liked girls, and he was a good football player. He was everything that any of his teammates would have wanted to be.
Northington, on the other hand, was the total opposite of Page.
He's introverted, shy. He doesn't seek attention. He's an opposite of, and that's not to diminish Mr. Northington. He's a nice guy and a good football player, but he's not Greg Page.
Nate was just quiet and to himself, and Greg was much more outgoing. He's the kind of guy to say, okay, we're gonna have a party, and Greg was the first one to show up. You say something about a party to Nate, and he said, I'll pass.
There was some racial tension present on the UK team in 1966, as some of the Wildcat players had never played with African Americans. And while UK's campus was integrated, the black football players still faced issues.
So you look at the times, I mean, as a young man, I had to ride on the back of the bus. I also had, when I went to the Greyhound bus station, I had to drink out of the colored water fountain. I had to go to the colored bathroom. That was the name. And I couldn't go downtown and sit down at Woolworths and order my food. So those were a sign of the time. So yes, it was. It was there. UK was no different.
But there were also plenty of white players on UK's team who embraced the new black players and went out of their way to make them feel welcome. Still, Page and Northington realized that in order to carry the burden of being the first black athletes to play in the SEC, they would need other black players on board. In 1967, Page and Northington helped successfully recruit 2 more black players to UK, Wilbur Hackett from Louisville Manual and Houston Hogg from Davis County.
They just talked more about needing help, needing support, needing more African American players to come to UK to make this thing work.
Hackett said that Bradshaw's promise to his family to look out for him during his time in Lexington sealed the deal.
But his commitment to me, and he's one of the reasons that I did go to UK, was that he told my parents that if you allow your son to sign with us, then I will take care of him.
Coming up, a routine practice drill drastically changes everything for UK and Northington. That's when Turning the Page returns right after the break.